Hello, my name is Eli Nadeau, and I'm at the New School in New York City, speaking with Sandra Gilbert in California and Susan Gubar in Indiana, recipients of the 2012 National Book Critics Circle Ivan Sandrof Lifetime Achievement Award. Congratulations to you both.
Thank you very much.
The Sandrof Award is but the latest in a series of well-earned laurels acknowledging the significance of your collaboration. Your co-written texts include The Madwoman in the Attic, The Woman Writer and the 19th Century Literary Imagination, published in 1979, and No Man's Land, The Place of the Woman Writer in the 20th Century, a 3-volume work published between 1988 and 1994, as well as several co-edited anthologies such as the Norton Anthology of Literature by Women, first published in 1985, and the Norton Reader in Feminist Criticism and Theory, released in 2007, all of which have helped to establish a feminist canon and continue to galvanize critical, literary, and cultural discussions today. In these foundational studies, you named for the world the anxiety of authorship, an affliction common to women writing in English during the 19th and 20th centuries. But as we've discovered, it's an infection widespread across generations, nations, and languages. This concept is now well known, but in '79, when Madwoman exploded onto the literary scene, the gendered ways we write and publish had yet to be examined comprehensively. Susan and Sandra, you helped name and trace these phenomena, and yet, unlike the subjects of your scholarship, neither of you seemed particularly prone to this anxiety when you began. Perhaps you could offer some thoughts about the way your collaboration unfolded, not just the impressive feat of producing volumes such as this one, Madwoman, without the benefit of email and other technology, but primarily the way you developed a shared consciousness through your writing that was not part of your experience before coming together at Indiana. In other words, how did you come to recognize yourselves as feminists through your scholarly interactions with the text and with each other?
Thank you for those lovely words. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. It's just such an honor to be in this position and to have someone being so gracious and incisive about us. Our experience interacting with texts and working on The Madwoman, which was preceded by teaching a class together, was truly electrifying. Maybe Susan wants to say a little more about. I mean, I think we're going to sort of alternate in our discussion. If that's you, Susan.
Yes, certainly. I'm glad you mentioned the classroom. It seems to me that it was an extraordinary intellectual adventure that was deeply pedagogic. We really did learn by creating lesson plans, by chatting with our students, by discussions, by talking on the phone the night before about what we were going to do, and the phone the next day about what we had done in the classroom. It was an extremely exciting adventure, shot through with learning for us as we were teaching.
This was a time when neither of us had done any kind of what would be called feminist work. We had not studied women's literary history in school. In fact, I would say that when I was an undergraduate, the only woman writer that I read was maybe Jane Austen. I'm not even sure. I read Dickinson in elementary school, you know, the one about the locomotive.
Of course.
Lap the miles, right? And I knew about Elizabeth Barrett Browning because she had those sausage curls and a wild romance for the poet. But I really didn't, and I never had a woman. I had one woman teacher in college and graduate school, only one, and she wasn't in a field that was related to anything that was significant to me at that time. She was a linguist. And so it was, I don't know what those of us, and there were masses of us in our generation in the 70s and in the 60s and 70s who were going to graduate school. What did we think we were doing? Professors were people with tweed jackets, big, heavy, clumpy shoes, and pipes, and increasingly with beards. Yeah. And we couldn't fit into any of those categories. So, and yet we forged ahead. And in the course of forging ahead, we were at first male identified. I think Susan thought much more about images of women than I did. She thought a lot more about gender than I did, and that was a huge influence on me that she knew so much. I thought about gender and sexuality because I wrote a dissertation on D.H. Lawrence's poetry.
Of course.
That's what I wanted to get into.
Yeah. And Susan, you were writing about monsters, right?
Right, I was writing about female monsters in 18th century poetry, partly because I felt kind of monstrous myself because I got very, very large with my first pregnancy. But I think it's important to remember when we met in an elevator at Indiana University in Valentine Hall in 1973, there was a women's movement. And somehow, I think for me, I really only accessed it through the intellectual journey of the collaboration. I think that it became a political passion through the intellectual engagement with Sandra and in the collaboration itself. So it's true that I never had a male tutor in college or graduate school, and we studied very few women writers. But the women's movement was building at that point, and there were a few conferences we attended in the 70s, Sandra, where we did meet a few other people who were just beginning to think about the concept of women's traditions in English.
Oh, it was thrilling. We met Elaine Showalter, we met Nina Auerbach, we met Susan Stanford Friedman, Rachel Blau Duplessis. We met a whole number of feminists at a range of conferences, which were tremendously interesting, and we learned a lot. But I think we learned the most in our classroom. We learned the most in our class.
And you brought text to the classroom that had not made it there before. I mean, in fact, you continue to bring text into the classroom that are otherwise denigrated. And we're, women and feminists and literary scholars of every stripe are indebted to you for that.
These were the days of ditto. These were the days of dittoing, and so we did an awful lot of dittoing. We dittoed like mad.
There were so many texts in those days that were just starting to be recovered by other scholars who were interested in women's literature. And in the 70s or 80s, it's hard to remember that people had not heard of Kate Chopin or of Charlotte Perkins Gilman or of Zora Neale Hurston. These texts were only beginning to be really only coming into print at that point. Till then, we had to Xerox. Or ditto, as Sandra says.
Great.
I myself had never heard of some of these people. I did not know the work of Kate Chopin at that time. I wasn't an Americanist. That's the other thing. Neither Susan nor I was quite exactly in the field that we were.
Right. Well, happily,
I was in, and she was in the 18th century. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So unfortunately, we're coming to the end of what our technology can sustain, but I want to thank you so much for giving us your incredible body of work and for giving me your time in this interview. And I congratulate you both and wish you the very best of health and writing in the future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's a pleasure.